Hi, I'm Danny and these are my Diecast Disasters, and here I have a Matchbox 51 Hudson Hornet, and in this video I'm going to be customizing it, ratting it out a bit and making it into a pickup. So Matchbox have been making this model since 2017. This is a 2018 version, so I must have had it sitting around for a while. I actually would have liked to have done a NASCAR with this, but of course it's a 4-door. I think Hot Wheels do the 2-door one. Anyway, we'll crack on with it and take it apart. There was 2 posts, so I'll drill those out, and then I should be able to take the base off. Now that the posts are drilled out, I can pop the base off there. So there's the base and the interior and a windscreen. And then the main casting there. The next step will be to take the paint off of the casting. So I'm using some paint stripper. Paint that on and leave it for 10 minutes or so. And all the paint will bubble up and then I can wash it off with some water. And here it is with the paint stripped off, still looking a bit of a mess, so we'll give it a further clean with the wire brush on my rotary tool. Use a different wire brush for the insides usually. Okay, here's our casting all cleaned up. Now I'm going to chop it up a bit to make it into a pickup. So first of all I'm going to cut the rear roof and the boot and stuff out of it. Next I'm going to take off those lights and a horn on the top. Just using a sanding drum on my rotary tool to do this, and then I'll clean it up with some sandpaper. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is remove the rear door panel lines. Here I've got a tube of epoxy putty. I'll just cut a little piece off and then knead it up. And once I've kneaded it well, I'll just roll out a little sausage there. And I'm going to press that into those panel lines. And then I'll leave that to cure. So here it is, an hour or so later. Give it a decent time to cure. It's nice and hard, and then I can use a needle file and some sandpaper to sand it back down smooth. The next thing to do is to make a rear for the cab there. So I'm just cutting out a piece of styrene sheet, the same shape as the rear of the cab. My camera will focus. And then I used some thick super glue to glue that in place. And then I used my craft knife and some sandpaper to trim it and sand it down smooth. Next I'll move on to the deck. So I've cut out a couple of side panels here. This is just balsa wood, a reasonably thick sheet of it. So I've glued those in place, and then I'll trim them down and sand them so that they are flush with the sides there. And next I've cut out a base for the deck, then a final piece at the front of the deck there. The next job will be to start painting it, but first I'm just going to mask off all the wood on the deck. So now for painting, first of all I hit it just with some silver, mainly to paint over that white piece at the rear of the cab. Next I use some brown and some orange brown to give it a base coat of rust. Here I'm using some liquid mask to mask off the doors. Leave that to dry. So there's both doors masked off, and I'm going to paint it with a mixture of this blue and then some really watered down white over the top of that. So here it is after the blue paint. So hopefully the blue and white has given it a faded paint appearance. Next I'll rub off that liquid mask, just using my finger to do that. Sorry, it's a bit off camera. Here we go. I'll remove the liquid mask. Next I'm going to mask over all the blue areas, just leave the door, and I'm going to paint that with some cream. And unfortunately, when I was removing the masking tape, it lifted up a section of the paint here. There you can see. Anyway, I've got to be a bit more careful, so I'll unmask the rest of it off camera. There you can see where it took a chunk of the paint off, so I had to patch over that whole section. There we go. I basically just used the same thing. I gave it a base coat of rust and then painted over in the blue. Next I'm going to use some 1200 grit sandpaper and some water, and I'm going to sand down the top layer of paint, exposing some of the rust underneath. And here it is after the sanding. You can see that patched area just really gave it a bit more different colours and textures in there. So here's some Mannering's classic motorcycle decals that I've printed out. And the next step will be to apply these. You can see these door ones in particular were a bit fiddly. Once those were well dried, I use a little bit of sponge on the end of a stick, and I'm using some orange rust and German red brown, and just applying a bit more rust here and there. And here I'm going to add some dark grey wash to the panel lines around the doors. So here's the casting painted, and I also hit it with a thin coat of matte varnish. It's quite a satiny matte though, just to seal on those decals. And now I can remove the masking from the wooden deck. And then I'm going to use some sepia ink to stain it a nice dark brown. So there's the body finished. I'll put that aside and move on to the chassis. So because I just popped the old wheels out, I've put in some short pieces of axle there. It's just brass tubing. Then I gave it a base coat of silver and black on the inside. I went over this with a black wash, and then I'm going to finish it off just with some of this rust texture airbrushed underneath. See, it's come over onto the top side a little bit. And here are some nice aftermarket wheels with Dunlops on them. Here's the interior. All I'm going to have to do to that is cut the rear off. And the same with the windscreen there. I'm just going to cut the rear section off. And you can see they fit nicely into the body now. So next I'll just paint that interior. I hit it with black underneath and white on the top. And then I'm just applying a light brownish wash over that. And so here are the parts of our Hudson Hornet ready to reassemble. So I'll just pop in the windscreen and the painted interior. And then the base, I'll just put the wheels on that as well. And I'll just press nicely in there onto the front post. Should be enough to hold it on. Tuck those front wheels in under the rims. And then I can hold the whole thing together with a button head screw. Alright, so we'll put that aside and we can move on to this little motorcycle to go on the rear. So I've printed this on my resin printer. I'll leave a link down below to the files from Thingiverse. I think it's 37 millimeters long. So I'm just going to have to paint it. I gave it a base coat of black. And then I hit this with white, only from the top down. I then painted the whole thing in a green. This is a mixture of olive and army green because the military green was a bit dark. Then I've detailed it. And to finish it off, I'm just going to rub some of this dust weathering powder all over it. And then I sealed all of that with a light coat of matte clear. Right, so there's a little antique motorcycle ready to go on the deck of our Hudson Hornet. But just before we take a look at the finished build, let's take a quick look back at what we started with. Here's our nice clean looking 51 Hudson Hornet. It's actually the Fernando Valley Newen Fire Department Chief's car. But now it's Mannering's classic motorcycle pickup truck. Well rusted and ratted out. The rear chopped off it and it's got a nice wooden deck there now. Got those nice aftermarket wheels on it, with the Dunlops on them, all liveried up for Mannering's motorcycle garage. And to finish it off, we've got the vintage motorcycle on the rear there. So I think it looks pretty cool. You can let me know what you think in the comments down below. Before I go, a quick shout out to my Patreons. Thanks heaps for supporting the show. Check out the links down below. There's a link to my other channel, there's a link to my Patreon, and there's a link where you can get some cheap super glue. Thanks heaps for watching. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you want to see similar comment, remember to subscribe and click the bell. Give the video a like, and I'll catch you on the next one.